The sun streamed through the wide bay windows of the Whitaker home, bathing the kitchen in soft gold. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm croissants hung in the air, mingling with the light scent of Sarah's lavender hand soap. She stood at the countertop, her reddish-brown hair shimmering in the light as she cut strawberries with practiced ease. Her movements were unhurried, almost meditative, as if the world behind these walls did not exist. Mark, her husband, leaned against the kitchen island, his broad shoulders relaxed and a lazy smile playing on his lips as he scrolled through something on his phone. Their home, a meticulously restored Victorian mansion in the heart of suburban Connecticut, hummed with the quiet perfection of a Sunday morning. "It smells like Paris," Mark said, looking up from the screen. His voice was warm, such that even a casual compliment seemed intimate. He was wearing a tight gray t-shirt and jeans, his dark hair still slightly disheveled from sleep. Sarah laughed softly, her green eyes briefly glancing at him. If Paris had kid-proof cafes and mortgages, maybe. She popped a piece of strawberry into her mouth, her lips curling into a playful grin. "You'll wash the dishes if you continue to flatter me." "He's coming." Mark put down the phone and crossed the kitchen in 2 steps, hugging her waist from behind. He pressed his lips to the curve of her neck, lingering just long enough for her to lean her head back against his chest. "It's worth it," he muttered. A sharp voice came from the living room. "Ugh, are you serious?" Emma, their 14-year-old daughter, lounged on the sofa, her dark braids swaying as she looked up from her sketchbook. Her brown-green eyes, so similar to her father's, sparkled with feigned disgust, but the corners of her lips twitched into a smile. "Can you not kiss right before my breakfast?" Sarah pulled away from Mark's embrace, laughing, and threw a piece of strawberry at Emma. "Eat something, smart girl. You grumble when you're hungry." Emma caught the berry mid-flight, popping it into her mouth with a dramatic eye roll. "I'm grumbling because you're embarrassing. These are different things." She flipped the page in the album, her pencil moving in quick, confident strokes. The slight creak of graphite on paper was a familiar sound in the Whitaker household Emma was always drawing, her mind a quiet storm of observation and creativity. Mark settled onto a bar stool, grabbing a croissant from the basket on the countertop. "You're just jealous because your mom is still in shape," he teased, winking at Sarah. She spanked him with a kitchen towel, her laugh loud and easy. "Wow, Dad, this sucks." Emma didn't look up, but her tone was laced with warmth. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her attention already returning to the drawing. The page was filled with sharp, angular lines, perhaps a cityscape or something more abstract. Sarah looked at her daughter for a moment, pride flashing across her features. Emma was sharp and perceptive in ways that sometimes alarmed her. She noticed what eluded others, caught details that went unnoticed. The kitchen fell into a cozy rhythm. The clink of dishes, the hum of the coffee machine, the occasional notification signal from Mark's phone. Outside, the area was waking up. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the light hum of a lawnmower emphasized the suburban calm. The Whitaker's life was a polished picture of the American dream. Mark's architecture firm was thriving, Sarah's freelance graphic design job kept her busy but flexible, and Emma was a straight-A student with a quiet intensity that promised a bright future. They were the family that everyone envied, the one that did it all without apparent effort. Sarah poured herself a second cup of coffee, her gaze slid to the window. The backyard was full of color, the hydrangeas were in full bloom, the swing Emma had outgrown was still standing under the oak tree. "I was thinking," she said, her tone casual but thoughtful, "maybe we should rent out the guest house through Airbnb. It's just sitting idle, and we could make money to renovate the kitchen." Mark raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of his coffee. "Guest house? Sure. It's kind of like our buffer when my mom comes over." His tone was light, but a shadow of doubt flashed in his eyes. Sarah turned, leaning on the tabletop, her arms loosely crossed. "I know, but we hardly use it. And it's not that we don't have enough space. We could easily make a couple thousand a month. People like this area close to the city, quiet, safe." She pointed to the window, as if the manicured lawn and tree-lined streets were proof of her words. Mark bowed his head, thinking. I don't really like the idea of strangers wandering around our house. It somehow violates personal space. This is not a house, but a small house. Separate entrance, everything is separate. They will hardly intersect with us. Sarah's voice was calm but firm, as always when she had already made a decision. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her wedding ring glinting in the light. We can set strict rules. No parties, no pets, background checks. I've read about this. Emma looked up from the album, her pencil frozen. Wait, are we renting out a guest house? Like random people? Her tone was curious, not alarmed, but there was an edge to it, as if she had already considered the idea. Sarah smiled as she walked over to the couch and ruffled Emma's hair. Not random, selected. We will choose who stays. It could be fun, you know. Meet interesting people. Emma snorted, dodging her mother's hand. Funny? Mom, you sound like a realtor. What's next? A vision board for our brand. But her eyes lingered on Sarah, studying her, as if she had caught something unspoken under that sentence. Mark put the mug down, his face blank for a moment. I don't know, honey. This is a big responsibility. What if some strange guy comes along and destroys everything? Then we'll use their deposit for repairs and leave a bad review. Sarah's voice was light, but now there was a note of challenge in it. She met his gaze, her smile did not waver. Come on, Mark. We are not exactly living on the edge of risk. A little risk can be good. He looked at her, his jaw tense almost imperceptibly. He then broke into a smile, shaking his head. You are relentless, you know. Okay. Let's see. But I will veto anyone with a snake or a drum set. Sarah laughed, the tension dissipating as quickly as it had appeared. It's coming. No snakes, no drums. I'll start putting together an announcement this week. Emma's pencil creaked again, but her eyes darted between her parents, catching the subtext of their conversation. She didn't say anything, just tucked her knees up on the sofa and turned a page in the album. The lines she drew now were sharper, more angular, as if her hand was translating something her mind had not yet named. The morning continued, smooth and warm. Mark turned on the radio, letting soft jazz fill the kitchen as he helped Sarah put away the dishes. Emma disappeared upstairs to finish her homework, her sketchbook pressed to her side. Sarah took out her laptop, already looking through Airbnb's hosting rules, her brow furrowed in concentration. To any observer, the Whitakers were the picture of harmony, three people moving through their routines with the ease of long practice, their home a sanctuary of light and laughter. But something was stirring beneath the surface. It was subtle, like the first lap on calm water, too subtle to name, but impossible to ignore. Sarah's offer wasn't just about money or renovations. It was a spark, a quiet attempt at something new, something that could upset the fragile balance they had built. And Emma, with her sharp eyes and restless pencil, already felt it. Mark's slight smile hid a glimmer of concern, a question he didn't voice. The guest house, with its private entrance and empty rooms, loomed in the background, waiting to be filled. As the jazz played on and the sun rose higher, the Whitaker home stood serenely, its secrets neatly hidden behind closed doors. But secrets, like ripples on water, tend to spread. As Tuesday evening drew to a close, the Whitaker house fell into a soft silence, broken only by the clatter of Sarah's keyboard as she sat at the dining table. Her laptop was open to the Airbnb page, where she was finalizing the description of the guest house. The words on the screen spelled out an inviting advertisement, a cozy Victorian retreat, ideal for creative souls and travelers seeking peace. She added photos taken during golden hour, when light streamed through the windows, highlighting the warm tones of the wood floors and cream walls. Sarah sat back in her chair, rubbing her neck. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but there was a spark of satisfaction in them. She was creating something new, something of her own. Mark was in his office upstairs, his voice muffled, discussing the design of a new office building with a client. Emma sat cross-legged on the living room floor with headphones in her ears. Her fingers flipped through the pages of an old art magazine, but her eyes kept returning to the phone, where she was texting with a friend. The house lived its normal life, but there was anticipation in the air, The advertisement for the guest house had been published only a day ago, and Sarah was already checking her email every half hour. When Sarah's phone rang, she jumped. Notification from Airbnb, new booking request. Her heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from excitement. She opened the app, her fingers hovering over the screen. The request was from a certain Alex W., who wanted to rent a house for 2 weeks, starting next Friday. The profile was succinct but compelling. A 30-year-old photographer traveling around New England in search of inspiration for his next exhibition. 5 stars from previous owners, reviews praising his neatness and unobtrusiveness. A clean, respectful guest, wrote one. Left the house in perfect order, added another. Attached is a photograph. A man with dark, slightly curly hair, wearing a light linen shirt, stands by an old lighthouse, looking into the lens with a slight, almost shy smile. Sarah stared at the screen, her breathing becoming uneven. The name Alex W., cut like a shard of glass. She knew the name, knew him too well. 7 years ago, when she was a teacher at an art school, Alex was her student. Young, daring, with eyes that saw in her not just a mentor, but a woman. Their romance was short, feverish, saturated with guilt and secrets. She cut it off abruptly when she realized she had gone too far, but the memories remained, as bright as fresh paint and just as dangerous. Her fingers trembled, and she closed the app, as if that would erase what she had seen. "What's there?" Mark's voice pulled her out of her stupor. He walked down the stairs, holding a mug of unfinished tea in his hand. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned, and his dark hair was tousled, as if he was running a hand over his head in thought. Sarah forced herself to smile, her voice deliberately light. "First booking, some photographer Alex. He wants to rent a house for 2 weeks." Mark walked over, looking over her shoulder at the phone screen, which she opened again. "Alex W." He read, nodding. "Looks like a normal guy. Reviews are good. Photographer, you mean? Maybe Emma would be interested in chatting with him." He grinned, sipping his tea. "Do you approve?" Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. She could have said no. She could come up with any reason too short notice, uncertainty about the guest, anything. But something inside, maybe fear, or maybe something dark and inexplicable, made her nod. "Yes, it looks fine. I want to check everything again." "Don't worry," Mark patted her on the shoulder, his hand warm and soothing. "If something goes wrong, we'll just kick him out." He smiled, but his gaze lingered on her a little longer than usual, as if he had caught a hint of her concern. Sarah forced a laugh, looking away. "Yes, sure. I'm just a perfectionist." She clicked accept, and the notification went away. "Alex W. has been confirmed." Her heart was pounding, but she stood up, putting her phone in her jeans pocket. "I'll go check the house. We need to make sure everything is ready." Mark nodded, already distracted by his phone. "I'll help later. We need to finish the drawings." He went back upstairs, leaving Sarah alone. The guest house was a few steps from the main house, across a neatly trimmed yard. Sarah opened the door and was greeted by the smell of fresh paint and lemon cleaner. The room was small but cozy, a double bed with white linen, a wooden table by the window, shelves with books, and a couple of watercolors on the walls, her own, from the times when she still painted. She ran her fingers along the edge of the table, her thoughts confused. It couldn't be that Alex. It's a common name, and 7 years is a long time. People change, move, forget. But her body remembered the warmth of his hands, the whisper in the dark, the way he looked at her as if she were the only one in the world. She shook her head, pushing away the memories. It was stupid. Even if it's him, so what? She was married, happy. Her life was built with the precision of an architectural plan. Alex, if it really was him, was just a guest. 2 weeks, and he will leave. She wiped her suddenly sweaty palms on her jeans and began checking her drawers, making sure everything was in place. Meanwhile, Emma, having finished leafing through the magazine, got up from the floor and stretched. Her headphones slipped around her neck, and she heard her mother slam the guest house door. Emma walked to the window, her gaze slid across the yard. She noticed how Sarah froze at the table in the house. Her face was tense, almost alien. Emma frowned, her fingers gripping the edge of the windowsill. Mother was never nervous for no reason. She wanted to ask, but something instinct perhaps told her to wait. Instead, she returned to her phone and texted her friend, "Mom is up to something. Looks like it will be interesting." In the evening, Sarah returned to the house. Her face was calm again, but her eyes gave away she was somewhere far away. Dinner proceeded as usual, with Mark talking about a new project, Emma teasing him about his love of boring buildings, and Sarah smiling, but her answers were shorter than usual. When Mark suggested watching a movie, she cited fatigue and went upstairs. Lying in the darkness of the bedroom, she listened to Mark turn on the TV downstairs, and Emma laughed at some joke. Her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket. She was awake when Mark finally lay down next to her, his breathing even and unsuspecting. Friday came faster than Sarah expected. The morning was gloomy, the sky was overcast with gray clouds, and the air smelled of rain. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, holding a mug of cold coffee. The rain began just after noon, light and persistent, covering the Whitakers' front lawn in a thin, damp mist. It was warm inside the house, smelling of vanilla tea and freshly cut grass carried in from the street on the soles of boots. Sarah stood at the sink, mechanically wiping an already clean plate. Her movements were fast, almost convulsive. She didn't look out the window, although she knew that the black sedan was already parked at the curb. Knew he was here. Alex. The doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected, like the blow of a hammer. Sarah shuddered. The plate almost slipped out of her hands. She placed it on the drying rack, wiped her palms on her apron, and took a deep breath. Her reflection in the glass of the kitchen cabinet looked put together. Her hair was pulled neatly into a low bun. Her cream sweater emphasized the soft lines of her shoulders, and her lips, lightly touched with pale pink lipstick, were pursed into a polite smile. But her eyes, green, with dark eyelashes, gave her away. A shadow darted about them, which she could not hide. "I'll open it," Emma shouted from the living room. Her voice was light, almost enthusiastic. She had already taken off her headphones and jumped up from the couch, her sneakers thumping on the wooden floor. Emma was wearing her usual clothes, black jeans, a loose t-shirt with a faded indie band logo, and a thin silver chain around her neck, a gift from her grandmother. Her dark braid is slightly disheveled, giving her the appearance of a girl who is not trying to impress, but still attracts attention. Sarah wanted to stop her, to tell her that she could handle it herself, but the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she took off her apron, hung it on a hook, and followed her daughter, her steps measured like those of a man walking to the scaffold. Emma opened the door and Alex stood on the threshold, tilting his head slightly to shake the rain from his hair. He was taller than Sarah remembered, or maybe he just carried himself differently, with that casual confidence that comes with age. His dark hair, wet from the rain, curled at his temples, and the stubble on his chin made his face look sharper than in her memories. A linen shirt, slightly wrinkled from the trip, was tucked into dark trousers, and a leather bag, shabby but expensive, hung on his shoulder. His eyes, deep, almost black, slid over Emma, then over Sarah, and a spark of recognition flashed in them, which he immediately hid behind a warm smile. "Hi," he said, his voice low and slightly hoarse, as if he had just finished a long conversation. "I'm Alex. This must be the Whitaker house?" Emma nodded, her curiosity almost palpable. "Yeah, that's us. I'm Emma." She stepped back to let him inside. "You're a photographer, right? Cool. What are you filming?" Alex laughed, softly but sincerely, and stepped through the threshold, shaking water off his boots. Everything in a row, to be honest. Landscapes, people, moments that seem real. And you? You look like a person who knows a lot about art. Emma narrowed her eyes, but her lips twitched into a smile. "Maybe I do. I draw mostly, but not landscapes. That's boring." "Boring?" Alex raised his eyebrows. His tone was playful, but there was a sense of sincere interest in him. "Then tell me what you're drawing. Maybe I'll steal a couple of ideas." Sarah stood a few steps behind, her hands folded in front of her, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her sweater. She looked at Alex, but her gaze was cold, distant, like that of a hostess meeting a stranger. "Welcome, Alex," she said, her voice even almost formal. "I'm Sarah. I hope the trip wasn't too tiring." His gaze met hers, and for a split second time froze. There was something in his eyes, not a threat, not a mockery, but something more dangerous: knowledge. He knew who she was, and he knew she was faking it. But his smile remained flawless. "Thank you, Sarah. The trip was great." The rain added to the atmosphere. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying her, and added, "It's a beautiful house. It feels like creative people live here." Sarah nodded, her lips twitching into a polite smile, but she did not answer. She turned to Emma instead. Why don't you help Dad with dinner? I'll show Alex the guest house." Emma rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. "Okay, but only because I don't want to peel the potatoes." She cast a quick glance at Alex, as if assessing him, and went into the kitchen. Her steps were light, almost dancing. Sarah motioned Alex to the door leading to the courtyard. "Here, the house is nearby." She came out first, without looking back. Her posture was straight, but the fingers clutching the keys turned white. The rain had turned to drizzle, and the air was cool, thick with the smell of wet earth. Alex walked next to him, his bag swaying slightly on his shoulder. He was silent, but his presence was tangible, like an electric charge. When they reached the guest house, Sarah opened the door and stepped back to let him inside. "Here," she said, her tone businesslike. "The bed linen is fresh. There are towels in the bathroom. If you need anything, write through the application." She stood at the threshold without entering, her hand still clutching the keys. Alex lowered his bag to the floor and slowly looked around the room. His fingers slid along the edge of the wooden table, lingering on a watercolor on the wall, an old work of Sarah's, with the blurred lines of a sunset sky. "Yours?" he asked without looking at her. Sarah froze. "No," she lied, too quickly. "Just decor." He turned, his gaze calm but penetrating. "It's a pity. Looks like something personal." He stepped closer, only half a step, but it was enough to make her pulse quicken. "Thank you, Sarah, for the warm welcome. I appreciate it." She nodded, retreating towards the door. "If anything, we are in the main house. Good night." She turned and walked out. Her steps were fast, almost running. The rain was cold on her skin, but there was a fire burning inside her. In the main house, Mark was chopping vegetables for a salad, his movements confident but relaxed. He was wearing a dark blue shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, exposing his strong forearms. His face, with clear cheekbones and light gray hair at the temples, was concentrated, but the corners of his lips lifted when he heard Emma humming something under her breath. "Well, how is our guest?" he asked, without looking up from the cutting board. "Don't you look like a serial maniac?" Emma snorted as she stirred the sauce on the stove. "Not yet, but he's cool. He speaks as if he is really interested and not just chattering." She glanced at Sarah, who had just entered. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you saw a ghost." Sarah forced herself to smile, her hand reaching for the teapot to keep herself occupied. "I'm just tired. And this rain." She poured water, avoiding her daughter's gaze. "Alex seems normal. Let's see how the 2 weeks go." Mark nodded, looking at her briefly. "The main thing is that he doesn't bring a tripod and start filming our yard." He laughed, but his eyes lingered on Sarah, catching her tension. He didn't say anything, but his hand hovered over the knife for a moment. Dinner was quiet, conversation flowed smoothly, but Sarah was distracted, her fork lazily picking at the salad. Emma was chatting about a new art project. Mark was teasing her about her obsession with watercolors, but Sarah was barely listening. Her thoughts were in the guest house, where Alex was probably unpacking his things, his fingers touching her old watercolor, his voice in her head. When she got into bed, Mark was already asleep. His breathing was even, and his hand lay on her pillow, as if he was reaching out to her in his sleep. Sarah looked at the ceiling, her heart pounding. Alex was here, in their world, and his presence, like a crack in glass, threatened to tear apart everything she had so carefully built. And somewhere in the next room, Emma, lying in the dark, drew in her album, the face of the man she had just met, Her pencil caught his smile, his gaze, his secret. Darkness enveloped the Whitaker house, extinguishing the last sparks of the day. A narrow moon broke through the thin clouds. Its light barely touched the walls of Sarah's bedroom, drawing ghostly shadows. Sarah lay staring at the ceiling, her breathing ragged, as if she was afraid that even in her sleep she would be betrayed. Mark slept next to him, his hand resting on the sheet, his fingers trembling slightly, as if reaching for something intangible. The house was silent, only occasionally creaking, like an old ship under the pressure of the waves. But in Sarah's head, the silence was deafening. She closed her eyes, looking for salvation in her sleep, but instead she was carried back 7 years ago, that autumn when her life, already bound by the bonds of marriage and motherhood, cracked under the pressure of the forbidden. Then she was Sarah Whitaker, Mark's wife of 30 years and mother of 7-year-old Emma, but also an artist teaching at a small art school in Boston. Her hair, slightly shorter than now, with red streaks, was hanging out of a careless bun. She wore jeans stained with acrylic and loose shirts that smelled of oil and turpentine. Her studio was a haven. The smell of paint, the rustle of canvases, the hum of students arguing about shadows and perspective. There she felt alive, not just as a wife or mother, but as a woman who could still create. Alex came into her life in September with the start of the semester. He was 23 younger, but his confidence made his age imperceptible. Tall, with angular shoulders and dark hair falling over his forehead, he moved as if he knew he was being watched. His paintings were rough, but bold, broad brushstrokes, deep shadows, portraits that felt the pulse. He did not shine with technique, but his passion was infectious. His eyes sparkled as he spoke, and Sarah noticed that her gaze lingered on him longer than it should have. Their connection began quietly, like a crack that you notice only when it has already spread. At first, these were conversations after classes, when the studio was empty and they were left alone, surrounded by the smell of paint. Alex asked about her work, about why she no longer exhibits, and his questions hit the target, revealing her longing for the Sarah who once dreamed of galleries. He looked at her not as a teacher, but as a woman, and it was both frightening and intoxicating. One evening, with the rain pattering on the studio windows, everything changed. Sarah was washing her brushes, her hands sticky with paint, and Alex stood at the easel, looking at her sketch her face, as she later realized, with soft lines of cheekbones and a thoughtful look. The air between them crackled with tension. "Do you draw for yourself?" he asked, his voice low with a hint of cockiness. "Not for lessons, not for family. For myself." She froze, the brush in her hand trembled. "I used to draw," she answered, her voice quieter than she wanted. "Now, life is different." He stepped closer. His gaze was warm, but there was a spark of challenge hidden in it. "You deserve more, Sarah. You are like fire. Don't let it fade away." She could have stopped him. She could move away and remind her that she is married, that she has a daughter, that this is wrong. But his words touched something deep inside, and when his fingers touched her arm, she did not move away. His skin was warm, smelling of turpentine and something sharp, like pine needles. His kiss was soft but persistent, and it contained all her suppressed thirst for freedom, passion for herself. Their romance was short, but bright, like a flash. They met in the studio after school, locking the door so no one could enter. The old sofa in the corner, littered with canvases, became their secret world. They talked about art, about his dream of traveling around Italy, about her fear that she would disappear into the routine of marriage. But words always led to touches. His fingers found her waist, slid along the curve of her neck, buried themselves in her hair. She was drowning in him, in his smell, in his whisper. "You are more than they see, Sarah." Each time she promised herself that this was the last, but she returned again, as if to a drug. A different reality awaited her at home. Mark, tired after work, but still smiling, kissed her temple, not noticing how she avoided his eyes. Emma, with her childish energy, climbed into her lap, chatting about school, and Sarah hugged her, feeling her heart clench with guilt. She cheated on her husband, the man who built a life with her, and this truth corroded her from the inside. But Alex was like a breath of air, a reminder that she could still burn. The affair lasted 2 months. It ended in November when Sarah realized she couldn't lie anymore. She saw herself in the studio mirror, disheveled hair, feverish gaze, the trace of his fingers on her skin, and realized that this had to end. She told him in the same back room where it all started. "We can't, Alex. This is a mistake." Her voice trembled, but was firm. He looked at her, his face motionless, but pain flashed in his eyes. "If that's what you decide," he said and left. The next semester he was no longer at school, and Sarah exhaled, thinking she had buried that part of herself forever. Sarah opened her eyes, her face wet with tears. She didn't notice how she started crying. In the darkness of the bedroom, the memories were too vivid, as if Alex was still standing in front of her, his voice calling her back. She looked at Mark. His face in his sleep was open, almost vulnerable, and this only increased her guilt. She betrayed him then, and now that Alex was back, her lies threatened to surface like a body that couldn't be drowned. She stood up, her feet touching the cold floor. Throwing on a robe, she went down to the kitchen, where the light of the lantern made its way through the curtains, drawing stripes on the table. She poured water but didn't drink, her fingers gripping the glass until it shook. What if Alex talks? What if he looked at Mark and said something that would ruin everything? Or worse, what if he remained silent, but his presence reminded her of how weak she was? She hated herself for being so vulnerable, for allowing the past to creep into her life so easily. Outside the guest house was dark, but Sarah knew Alex was there. Maybe he's sleeping. Maybe sitting by the window, looking at her old watercolor like today. She imagined his hands, slender fingers that knew her body better than she cared to remember. The thought was painful, but there was also a hint of attraction in it, and Sarah hated herself for it even more. The morning came with a headache and red eyes from insomnia. Mark left for the meeting, leaving a note. "I'll be back by lunch. I love." Emma ate her toast while scrolling through her phone, her gaze falling on Sarah. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her voice cautious but sharp, as always when she noticed something. "I just didn't get enough sleep," Sarah answered, pouring coffee. She spilled a little, her hand trembled. Emma was silent, but her eyes followed her mother. She saw more than she said, and Sarah knew her daughter would not miss this mystery. And in the guest house, Alex opened his laptop, his thoughts swirling around Sarah, the woman who once changed his life and now stood on the threshold of his own secret. Saturday poured a soft warmth through the Whitaker home, as if the rain that had been plaguing the city all week had decided to give it a break. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished oak floors and illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the air. The kitchen smelled of frying bacon and freshly ground coffee, and from the living room came the muffled rhythm of a guitar as Emma turned on her playlist, humming something under her breath. The house was alive, full of sound and movement, but beneath that surface flowed a tension as thin as a spider's web. Sarah stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. Her movements were precise, but there was a feeling of stiffness in them, as if she was trying to concentrate on anything other than the thoughts swarming in her head. She was wearing a light blue shirt tucked into jeans, and her hair, usually tied up, fell loosely over her shoulders today, hiding the shadows under her eyes. She hadn't slept most of the night, her mind racing between memories and the fear that that same Alex, would ruin her life with one word. Mark sat at the kitchen island, flipping through a clipboard with blueprints for a new project. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his polo shirt emphasized his strong physique. He looked relaxed, but his fingers tapped lightly on the tabletop, a habit that showed he was thinking about something important. Emma, in her usual uniform of black jeans and a band t-shirt, hovered nearby, pulling pieces of bacon off her plate until Sarah smacked her arm with a spatula. Sit down already," Sarah said. Her voice was light, but with a hint of fatigue. "Breakfast in a minute." Emma rolled her eyes but plopped down in her chair, her braids swaying. "You're like a sergeant, Mom." "Relax, it's Saturday." Before Sarah could answer, there was a knock on the door, not a bell, but a soft, confident one, as if the guest knew that he was expected. Sarah froze, her hand with the spatula hovering over the frying pan. Mark looked up, his eyebrows raised slightly. "This is probably our photographer," he said, moving the tablet away. I invited him to come in and chat. The guy seems normal, right? He looked at Sarah, waiting for confirmation, but she just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mark stood up and opened the door. Alex stood on the threshold, his dark hair slightly tousled by the wind, and he was holding a small paper bag in his hands. He was wearing a gray t-shirt that hugged his shoulders and dark jeans, and he had a smile on his face open, but with a slight sparkle that made him both charming and unpredictable. His eyes, deep and attentive, slid around the room, lingering on Sarah exactly a second too long. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm, with a slight hoarseness. "I hope it's not too early. I brought bagels, as a token of gratitude for your hospitality." He lifted the bag, and the aroma of fresh baked goods mixed with the smell of coffee. Mark smiled, gesturing for him to come in. "Great, Guy, you're already in the black. Come on in and join us." He took the bag and led Alec to the kitchen island. "Sarah is making pancakes, Emma." Emma pretends to help. Emma snorted, crossing her arms. "I provide moral support, Dad. This is important." She looked at Alex. Her gaze was curious, but not wary. "Bagels are cool. Where?" "From a small bakery in the center," Alex answered, sitting down on a chair with the ease as if he had been here dozens of times. He rested his elbows on the tabletop, his movements smooth, almost cat-like. "They bake like it's their last day on Earth. Try it with sesame seeds, you won't regret it." Sarah turned to the stove, her back straight, but her fingers tightly gripping the spatula. She felt his gaze without even turning around. It was like a touch, light but persistent. She put pancakes on the plate, trying not to meet his eyes, but his voice, his laughter, his presence filled the kitchen like smoke. "Emma, you draw, right?" Alex asked, taking a bite of the bagel that Mark had already cut. "I saw your sketches in the living room. You have a good eye. What inspires you?" Emma narrowed her eyes, but her cheeks turned slightly pink from the compliment. "Everything in a row. People, cities, sometimes just feelings." She shrugged, but her voice became livelier. "And you? You're a photographer. What do you photograph besides sunsets and coffee shops?" Alex laughed. His laugh was deep, sincere. "Oh, I'm not so corny. I like moments when people don't pretend. Street musicians, old ladies at the market, children who think no one can see them." He leaned a little closer to Emma, his tone becoming conspiratorial. "I also take pictures of abandoned ones. Old houses, factories. There are stories there, you know." Emma nodded, her eyes lighting up. "Cool. We have an abandoned barn nearby. Do you want me to show you sometime?" Sarah turned sharply, her voice harsher than she intended. No junk. You know the rules." She put the plate of pancakes on the table. Her movements were too fast. Emma rolled her eyes. "Mom, I'm not going to climb there. Just an idea." She looked at Alex, as if seeking support, and he winked at her, but his gaze immediately slid to Sarah. "Sarah is right," he said, his tone light, but there was something else in it, almost imperceptible. "Safety comes first. But if anything happens, I can film the outside of the barn. For the atmosphere." Mark smiled as he poured himself some coffee. "I like you, Alex. Responsible approach." He sat down next to me. His gaze was friendly but attentive. "Tell me, what brought you here?" "Photo project." Alex nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Yes, I'm looking for new faces, new stories. Connecticut is the perfect place, quiet but with character. Plus, your house." He looked around the kitchen, his eyes lingering on the watercolor on the wall, the same one that Sarah denied. "It's like from another time." "In a good way." Mark chuckled. "Sarah did her best. She is a master at creating comfort for us." He looked at his wife. His smile was warm, but Sarah just nodded, her face unreadable. The conversation moved on, jumping from photography to music. Alex seemed to be on the same page as Emma when she mentioned her love for old rock. He talked about the Smiths' concert he saw in his youth, and Emma, impressed, began asking about vinyl records. Mark, to Sarah's surprise, also joined in, remembering listening to Nirvana on cassette tapes in college. Alex was in his element. He joked, asked questions, listened with such attention that even Emma, usually wary with strangers, relaxed. Mark laughed, clapping Alex on the shoulder, and by the end of breakfast, it was clear that their guest had become almost one of their own. Sarah was silent, nodding in the right places, but her thoughts were somewhere else. She noticed how Alex moved too confidently, as if he knew where every cup, every chair was. His gaze found her every now and then, and each time she felt her skin burning. He didn't say anything unnecessary, but his presence was like a challenge, like a reminder of what she couldn't erase. By evening, the house calmed down. Emma went to her room, Mark watched football in the living room, and Sarah put away the dishes after dinner. She was alone in the kitchen when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Alex standing in the hallway leading to the bedrooms. His silhouette was dark against the light of the lamp, but she recognized him immediately, a slight tilt of his head, his hands in his pockets, a look that saw too much. Lost? She asked. Her voice was cold, but her heart was pounding. He smiled, slowly, as if he knew she was faking it. No, I just... He took a step closer. His voice became quieter. I wanted to say that your house is even more beautiful inside, especially this part. His eyes slid down the corridor, stopping at her bedroom door. Sarah pursed her lips, her fingers clenching the towel. The guest house is on that side, Alex. If you need something, right? She turned to the sink, her back tense. He didn't answer right away, but she felt his gaze. Then he said quietly, "Good night, Sarah." His steps moved away, but the echo of his words remained, like a footprint in the sand. She stood looking into emptiness, her hands trembling. In the living room, Mark was laughing at something on the TV, and upstairs Emma was drawing, her pencil catching the image of the man who had entered their home all too easily. But Sarah knew Alex was not just a guest. He was a shadow of her past, and now he was too close for her to pretend. Sunday at the Whitaker house began with a lazy silence, broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere in the neighboring yard. The light poured through the windows, soft and diffused, reflecting off the polished surfaces of the furniture. The kitchen was empty. There was a lone mug of half-drunk coffee on the table, and the faint aroma of cinnamon from yesterday's pie hung in the air. Sarah was off to a morning meeting with a design client. Mark was tinkering in the garage, sorting through boxes of old tools, and Emma was left alone, sprawled out on the living room couch with a sketchbook on her lap. Her pencil lazily traced the contours of her face, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, a hint of a smile. She didn't realize she was drawing Alex until she put the sketchbook down and frowned at the sketch. Emma was not one of those who easily succumbed to boredom, but today she was drawn to something new, to some kind of mystery. She stood up, her sneakers squeaking softly on the wooden floor, and walked towards the back door that led to the yard. The guest house stood a few steps away, its white shutters slightly open and its curtains fluttering slightly in the wind. Alex left in the morning. She saw him get into his sedan with a camera on his shoulder, and the curiosity that she tried to suppress now took over. He was comfortable, too charming, and Emma, with her keen senses, couldn't help but think that there was more to him than he was letting on. She pushed the door of the house, which turned out to be unlocked, and stepped inside. The air was cool, with a slight scent of leather and his cologne, sharp and woodsy. The room looked just as Sarah had left it. The bed was neatly made, the table by the window was clean, and there were a few books and her old watercolors on the shelf. But Emma's attention was caught by Alex's bag, carelessly thrown in the corner. Sticking out from under the flap was the corner of an old laptop, worn, with faded stickers on the lid. Emma froze, her heart speeding up. She knew that it was wrong to pry into other people's things, but her curiosity was stronger. Just taking a look, she thought, kneeling down. The bag was heavy, stuffed with wires, lenses, and some folders. Emma carefully pulled out the laptop, her fingers sliding along the cold metal. She looked around, as if expecting Alex to appear at the door, but the yard was empty. Sitting down on the floor, she opened the lid. The screen blinked, asking for a password, but Emma, with her teenage ingenuity, noticed that the laptop was not turned off, but simply in sleep mode. She tapped the touchpad and the screen came to life, revealing a folder of files labeled Archive. Emma scrolled through the list. Photographs, draft texts, several audio files. Her gaze caught on the video, simply titled Studio_2018. The date was 7 years ago, and something about it pricked her. She double-clicked, and the player opened, filling the screen with shaky footage. The video was shot in a room filled with warm light, with easels and canvases in the background. Emma recognized the setting. It was an art studio, similar to the one where her mother had once taught. The camera moved chaotically, as if someone was filming handheld, and voices, muffled but familiar, came from the speakers. "Are you serious?" A female voice, soft, with a slight laugh. Emma frowned, her fingers frozen. It was her mother, Sarah. She looked younger, with short hair, jeans, and a shirt stained with paint. She stood at the easel, holding a brush, and looked at someone off camera with a smile that was too lively, too personal. "Absolutely," answered a male voice, low, with a playful note. The camera turned, and Emma saw him, a young Alex, with long hair falling in his eyes and a cheeky smile. He held the camera, pointing it at Sarah, and his gaze was so close that Emma felt uneasy. "Show me what you're drawing, Sarah." "Don't be shy." Sarah laughed, waving the camera away. "It's just a sketch, Alex. Nothing special." But she stepped closer, her hand touched his shoulder, and this gesture, light but intimate, made Emma hold her breath. The video continued. They jokes, Sarah smeared paint on his cheek, he grabbed her wrist, and their laughter became quieter, as if they had forgotten about the camera. The footage cut out, but the last seconds showed their faces, too close to each other, and Sarah's gaze, full of something that Emma could not name, but felt like a blow. Emma slammed her laptop shut, her heart pounding. She sat on the floor, looking at the closed lid, her thoughts confused. It was her mother. And Alex. 7 years ago, when Emma was 7, when her family seemed indestructible to her. She didn't understand everything, but her mind, sharp and observant, put the pieces together. Her mother knew Alex before, and their relationship was not just a teacher's one. There was something more, something Sarah never talked about. Don't let the stories stay in the shadows. Like, subscribe, more truth will follow. She quickly put the laptop back into her bag, making sure to place it exactly as it was. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to get up and leave the house, closing the door behind her. The yard was empty, the sun was rising higher, but the world seemed different, as if someone had moved it off its axis. Emma returned to the house, her sneakers leaving wet marks on the floor. She plopped down on the sofa, grabbing the sketchbook, but the pencil didn't move. Her eyes kept returning to the window where the guest house could be seen. Sarah returned an hour later, her laptop bag clanking as she tossed it onto the table. She looked tired but put together, her blue dress immaculate and her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She smiled at Emma, but the smile was forced, as if she felt something was wrong. "How are you, Em?" she asked, pouring herself some water. "Aren't you bored?" Emma shrugged, her eyes glued to the sketchbook, but she wasn't drawing. "Fine, just lying around." Her voice was even, but there was a shadow in it that Sarah did not notice, too immersed in her thoughts. Mark came in from the back door, wiping his hands with a rag. His t-shirt was stained with dust, and perspiration glistened on his forehead. "Hey girls, I found my old fishing rods. Maybe we can go to the lake next week." He smiled, but his gaze lingered on Emma, catching her unusual silence. Why are you so thoughtful?" "Nothing," she answered, too quickly. She closed the album and stood up. "I'll go to my room. We need to complete the sketch." She went upstairs. Her steps were faster than usual. Sarah frowned as she looked after her. "What's wrong with her?" she asked, but Mark just shrugged, accustomed to teenage mood swings. "Maybe I'm just tired," he said, opening the refrigerator. "Or some guy didn't write." He grinned, but Sarah did not answer. Her fingers squeezed the glass. Emma closed the door to her room and sat on the bed, her album remaining on the table. She didn't want to draw. She wanted to understand. The video played in her head like a broken record. Her mom's laugh, Alex's look, their touch. She didn't know what it meant: romance, friendship, something else. But she felt that this was a secret that Sarah kept from everyone, even from Dad. And Emma, with her love of mysteries and truth, could not simply forget. She took the phone and started texting her friend, but stopped. It was too personal, too big. Instead, she opened the notes and wrote, "Mom and Alex, 2018. What was that?" Downstairs, Sarah stood at the window, looking at the guest house. She didn't know what Emma saw, but her maternal instinct told her that something had changed. And in the house, where Alex had not yet returned, his laptop lay in his bag, keeping a secret that had already begun to destroy the fragile balance of the Whitaker house. Monday burst into the Whitaker house with a bustle, as if someone had opened the windows and let in a cold wind. The morning was gray, the sky was overcast with low clouds, and the air smelled damp, foreshadowing more rain. The kitchen, usually warm and full of life, seemed sterile today. A lone plate with the remains of toast sat on the table, and the coffee maker hummed quietly, forgotten. Sarah sat at the table, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the napkin, tearing it into small shreds. She was wearing a gray turtleneck, emphasizing the paleness of her skin, and jeans, and her hair, casually tied into a ponytail, stood out at her temples. Her eyes, usually bright, were dull. Under them lay the shadows of insomnia. She looked at the phone, where there was an unread message from a client, but her thoughts were far away in the past, in the guest house, in something that she could not cancel. Mark entered the kitchen, his steps quick and purposeful. He was wearing a dark shirt, his sleeves rolled up, and in his hands he was holding a folder with drawings and a laptop. His face, with sharp cheekbones and light gray hair, was animated. His eyes sparkled with an enthusiasm that Sarah had not seen for a long time. He threw the folder on the table, not noticing how the scraps of the napkin scattered, and began to speak without looking at her. "I have great news," he said, his voice full of energy. "Remember Taylor. He wants to invest in a new project, a branch of the company in New York. This is a huge step, Sarah. If everything comes together, we can double our income in a couple of years." He opened the laptop. His fingers ran over the keys, opening tables and graphs. Sarah nodded, her lips twitching into a faint smile. "This is great, Mark." Her voice was quiet, almost lost in his pressure. She clenched her palms, her nails digging into the skin. She wanted to talk, to lay everything out about Alex, about 7 years ago, about the guilt that choked her every night. But Mark had already turned to the screen, his brow furrowed as he studied the numbers. "I know it sounds risky," he continued, not noticing her tension, "but Taylor has already found the premises, and I'm going there tomorrow to check everything out. If we play right, this could be our breakthrough." He finally looked at her. His smile was wide, but there was more ambition than warmth in it. "How are you holding up? I know you took on a lot with this Airbnb." Sarah opened her mouth, her throat tightening. "Mark, I need to tell you." She began, but her voice was drowned out by the ringing of his phone. He raised a finger, motioning for him to wait, and answered the call. "Taylor, yes, I'm just looking." He moved to the window. His voice became quieter, but still energetic. Sarah looked at his back, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She felt invisible, as if her words, her pain, had no weight. She stood up, putting the plate away in the sink, her movements mechanical. Mark did not notice how she left the kitchen, did not hear how her steps died down in the corridor. Emma had already left for school. Her backpack had disappeared from the hallway, and her sketchbook remained on the coffee table, open to a page with a sketch of a face that Sarah tried not to recognize. The house was empty, but its silence was oppressive, like a premonition of a storm. Sarah went upstairs, her hand slid along the railing, cold and smooth. She wanted to work, answer letters, but instead she sat on the bed, looking into emptiness. The guilt was like poison, slowly spreading through the veins. She cheated on Mark then, 7 years ago, and now her past has come back to take away everything she built. Her phone rang, breaking her out of her daze. The message was from Alex, sent through the Airbnb app. but its tone was far from formal. "We need to talk. Meet me at the lodge at 11. This is important." Sarah stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She could have ignored him, blocked him, told Mark that the guest was acting strange, but something fear, curiosity, or something darker made her stand up. She put on her coat, grabbed her keys, and went out into the yard. Her steps were fast, almost silent on the wet grass. The guest house was warm despite the morning cold. Alex was waiting for her inside, sitting at the table, his long fingers tapping the lid of an old laptop. He looked different than he did yesterday, not a relaxed guest, but someone who knew he was holding a trump card. His dark hair was combed back, and his gray shirt, slightly unbuttoned at the collar, emphasized the sharpness of his features. His eyes were cold when he looked at Sarah, but there was a spark in them that she remembered all too well. "Close the door," he said. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. Sarah froze, her hand still on the doorknob. "What do you need, Alex?" Her tone was harsh, but inside she was trembling. She closed the door, but remained at the threshold, her posture tense, like that of a person ready to run. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze slowly sliding over her, from her feet to her face, as if he had seen her not now, but 7 years ago. "You're not happy to see me, Sarah. I thought we could renew our acquaintance." His lips twitched in a smile, but it was as sharp as a blade. "We don't know each other," she snapped. Her voice was cold, but her fingers clenched into fists. "You are a guest. If you don't like something, leave." Alex laughed, quietly, almost affectionately. "Oh, Sarah, you've always been good at pretending." He opened the laptop, his fingers quickly ran over the keys, and the screen lit up. "But I don't like games where only one player knows the rules. Look." He turned the laptop towards her, and Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. There was a video on the screen, the same one filmed in the studio 7 years ago. She recognized herself immediately. Disheveled hair, paint-stained shirt, her laughter, her hand touching his shoulder. The shots were short, but their proximity was obvious, too obvious. She stepped forward, her hand reaching for the laptop, but Alex slammed it shut, his movement as quick as a blow. "Not so fast," he said, his voice becoming quieter but more dangerous. "I have copies, and I know how to send them to your husband. Or maybe your daughter. She's curious, isn't she? Already rummaging through my things." Sarah froze, her breathing becoming ragged. "Emma?" she whispered, her eyes widening in horror. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing," he replied, his tone almost indifferent. But she's smart. She'll figure it out on her own if I give her a hint." He stood up, his figure looming over her, although he did not take a step closer. "Here's my proposal, Sarah. You and I will spend some time together, just like before, or this video will be seen by everyone you care about." Her throat constricted, and she could barely breathe. "Are you blackmailing me?" Her voice trembled, but there was rage in it. "After everything that happened, you came to ruin my life." Alex tilted his head, his gaze softening, but it was an act. "I don't want to destroy Sarah. I want you. You are mine then, and I see that you are still the same." He took a step, his hand rose as if he wanted to touch her, but she stepped back, her back resting against the door. "I'm not the same," she hissed, her eyes burning. "I have a family. I have a life. Go away, Alex, or I'll tell Mark everything myself." He smiled, but his smile was empty. "Will you tell me? And what will he do? Will he forgive you? Or will he kick you out? And Emma, how will she look at a mother who has lied to her all her life?" He fell silent, letting the words settle like dust. "Think, Sarah. You have until tomorrow. I'm in no hurry." She turned, her hand yanking on the doorknob, and she ran out into the beginning rain. Her coat was soaked within seconds, but she didn't notice. She ran towards the house, her chest was on fire, and his voice, his threat, his truth was spinning in her head. She wanted to scream, but instead she closed the door behind her and leaned against the wall, her breathing heavy as sobs. In the living room, Mark was still talking on the phone, his voice full of enthusiasm, unsuspecting. Emma was at school, her album was closed, but her questions, Her suspicions were already ripening, and in the guest house, Alex looked at the closed door. His fingers squeezed the edge of the table, and in his eyes there was something that Sarah did not see, not only desire, but also pain, old and deep, which brought him here. Tuesday came with a heavy sky, where the clouds, dense and gray, seemed to be pressing on the ground. The Whitaker house was as quiet as before a storm. Emma had left for school, her backpack slammed the door at 7 in the morning, and Mark had gone to New York to meet with an investor, leaving a note on the refrigerator. "I'll be back tomorrow. I'll call. I love." Sarah stood in the kitchen, her fingers clutching a mug of cold tea, and her gaze was riveted to the window, where the guest house loomed like a shadow of her past. She lay awake all night, her mind torn between fear and anger. Alex's threat of video that could destroy her family was like a knife to her throat. But even worse was what she felt, a dark, forbidden attraction that she thought she had buried 7 years ago. Her phone rang, and she jumped. A message from Alex, short and cold. "North Star Motel, room 12. 3 hours. Don't be late." Sarah stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She could ignore him, call the police, tell Mark everything, but each option seemed like a trap. The police will ask about the video, Mark will not forgive, and Emma will never look at her the same way. She clutched the phone, her nails digging into her palm. "I'll just talk," she told herself. "I'll find out what he wants and find a way out." But deep down she knew it was a lie. Sarah put on a dark coat that hid her figure and pulled on a scarf, although the day was not that cold. She took the car keys, her movements were fast, almost panicked. Her reflection flashed in the hallway mirror, a pale face, green eyes full of anxiety, lips compressed into a thin line. She looked like a woman going to execution, but there was a determination in her posture that she herself did not expect. She walked out without looking back and got into her sedan, the engine purring, carrying her away from her home, away from her life, away from everything she was trying to protect. The North Star Motel was 20 minutes away, on the outskirts of town, where the highway snaked past gas stations and fast food joints. The building was low, with peeling blue paint and a neon sign that blinked even during the day. The parking lot was almost empty, with only a couple of cars parked at the far end. Sarah parked further away from the entrance, her hands shaking as she turned off the engine. She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the steering wheel as if that would keep her from taking the next step. But time passed, and she knew that Alex was waiting. Room 12 was on the first floor. Its door, faded from the sun, looked as if it kept dozens of other people's secrets. Sarah knocked, her knuckles barely touching the wood, but the door opened immediately. Alex stood in the doorway, his dark hair damp, as if he had just stepped out of the shower. He was wearing a tight black t-shirt and jeans, and his eyes, deep and unreadable, met hers with a small smile that was both familiar and menacing. "You've come," he said, his voice low and softly hoarse. He stepped back to let her inside. "I knew you couldn't refuse." Sarah stepped through the threshold, her movements constrained. The room was small, with cheap floral wallpaper and a bed covered with a dark green blanket. The air smelled of bleach and something sweet, like old cologne. Alex's laptop sat on the nightstand, closed, but its presence was like a ticking bomb. Sarah stood at the door, still wearing her coat, her arms crossed over her chest. "What do you want, Alex?" she asked. Her voice was firm, but a note of fear trembled in it. "Name your price and disappear." He closed the door, the lock clicked, and the sound made her flinch. He turned, his smile disappearing, replaced by something darker, almost hungry. "The price? Sarah, do you think I'm here for the money?" He stepped closer, his movements slow, like those of a predator confident in its prey. "I want you. Like then. You remember, right?" Her throat tightened, and she stepped back, her back touching the door. "It was a mistake," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her, trembling. "I was stupid. I have a family, Alex. Please leave us alone." He stopped, his eyes narrowed, but there was a flash of pain in them that she did not expect. "Family," he repeated, his tone bitter. "You chose her then, and I left. But I haven't forgotten you, Sarah. Not a day went by that I didn't think about you. He took another step, now only a few inches separated them. And I know that you haven't forgotten either. She wanted to argue, to tell him that he was wrong, that her life with Mark and Emma was all she needed. But his proximity, his smell pine needles, leather, something elusively familiar stirred up memories that she had locked deep inside. She remembered the studio, his hands, his whisper, the way he made her feel alive. And now, standing here, she hated herself for the way her body was reacting, for the warmth that rose in her chest, for the trembling that was not only fear. "You're blackmailing me," she said, her voice sharp but weak. "This is not love, Alex. This is revenge." He shook his head, his hand rising and his fingers brushing her cheek, softly but firmly. "Not revenge," he whispered. "Is it true? You're still mine, Sarah. You're just afraid to admit it." She had to push him away, hit him, and run out. But his touch was like a spark, and her resistance cracked like glass. She closed her eyes, her breathing became uneven, and when his lips found hers, she didn't pull away. The kiss was slow but deep, full of 7 years of longing and anger. His hands slid under her coat, finding her waist, and she felt her body betray her, pressing against him. She hated him, she hated herself, but in that moment all that mattered was his warmth, his taste, his insistence. They fell onto the bed, Sarah's coat sliding to the floor, her hands tangling in his hair. His fingers unbuttoned her blouse, exposing her skin, and his every gesture was familiar, as if they had never been apart. She whispered his name, not realizing what she was doing. Her mind became clouded, and the guilt that was choking her receded, giving way to passion. Time dissolved, and the room, the motel, the whole world disappeared, leaving only the two of them. But outside the window, in the shadows of the parking lot, someone was watching. A dark, hooded figure stood by an old pickup truck, her phone pointed at the window of room 12. The curtains were parted slightly, just enough to catch silhouettes, movements, a moment. The camera clicked, showing Sarah, her head thrown back, and Alex leaning over her. The figure put away the phone, her lips pressed into a thin line, and she silently walked away to the car. Her steps dissolved in the sound of the beginning rain. Sarah didn't know how much time had passed when she finally pulled away, her breathing heavy and her skin burning. She sat up, her hands shaking as she buttoned her blouse. Alex looked at her, his chest heaving, but there was triumph in his eyes, mixed with something she couldn't make out, regret, maybe. "It doesn't change anything," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. "I'm not yours, Alex, and I won't." He smiled, but his smile was tired. "You've already made your choice, Sarah, and I'm not the only one who knows this." He nodded at the laptop, reminding him of the video, of its power. Sarah sat up, her hands shaking as she buttoned her blouse. "It won't happen again," she said, her voice icy. "If you come near me again, I'll tell Mark everything, and let him decide what to do with you." Alex laughed, but his laugh was empty. "Will you tell me? And what will he do? Will he forgive you? Or will he kick you out? And Emma, how will she look at a mother who lied?" He stood up, his figure looming over her. "I hold your future, Sarah. One click, and it will fly apart." She grabbed her coat and stood up, her legs shaking, but she forced herself to stand upright. "If you do this, you will destroy yourself," she said, her eyes flashing. "I'm not alone in this video." She turned and walked out. Her steps were fast, almost running. It started to rain as she got into the car. Her hair stuck to her face, and the tears she hadn't noticed mixed with the water. She didn't know that outside the hotel window, in the shadow of a pickup truck, someone was holding a phone pointed at room 12. The curtains were partly open, and the camera caught their silhouettes, Sarah leaning back on the bed and Alex leaning over her. Click, and the photo was saved, pixels capturing the moment that could have been the end of her world. The hooded figure put away the phone and silently walked away, disappearing into the rain. When Sarah returned home, it was already 5. She threw the keys on the table. Her coat fell to the floor, but she didn't pick it up. The house was empty, but the silence was deafening. She wanted to take a shower, to wash away his smell, his touch, but the phone rang and her heart froze. This was Emma's school. Mrs. Whitaker, the secretary's voice was alarmed. Emma didn't return to her last lesson. Her friends say she left after lunch. Do you know where she is? Sarah felt the floor disappear from under her feet. What do you mean gone? Her voice was hoarse, almost a scream. She should be at school. We tried to call her, but the phone was turned off. The woman continued. We have already informed the police, but you need to come. Sarah hung up, her hands shaking so much that she barely hit the button. She grabbed the keys, her thoughts a chaos. Emma has disappeared. Her daughter, her smart, observant Emma, who had seen too much, was missing. And Sarah felt that this was connected with Alex, with the video, with her sins. She ran out into the rain, her car sped off, and only one question was spinning in her head. What if she had lost Emma forever? Rain pelted the windshield, turning the world into a blur of gray shadows and flashing lights. Sarah drove the car down the highway, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Panic burned her from the inside. Every second was like a hammer blow. Emma is missing. Her daughter, her girl, disappeared after school, and the call from school still echoed in her head. Her phone is off. We reported it to the police. But the police were too slow, too distant, and Sarah felt that it had to do with Alex. His threats, his video, his shadow hanging over her life had all led to this moment. Her phone, lying on the passenger seat, vibrated and the screen lit up. Sarah glanced without slowing down. Message from Alex. Her heart sank and she grabbed the phone, almost dropping it. The text was short, but every word cut into her like a knife. If you don't arrive in an hour, you will lose your daughter forever. Old warehouse at 17 River Road. One-on-one. No police. The address was familiar, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts, a place that even during the day looked like the backdrop to a nightmare. She dropped the phone, her foot pressed harder on the gas, and the car lurched forward, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. The road to River Road was endless. The rain drummed on the roof, the windshield wipers couldn't cope, and a whirlwind was spinning in Sarah's head. Emma, her smile, her pointed questions, her drawings. She couldn't lose her. Not now, not because of my mistakes. The guilt that had been choking her since Alex arrived was now unbearable. She cheated on Mark 7 years ago, she gave in to Alex today, and every weakness she had led to this. But she won't let him take Emma, even if you have to pay with your own life. The warehouse on River Road loomed in the darkness, its rusted walls and broken windows barely visible in the headlights. Sarah parked to the side, her car buried in the shadows. The rain fell steadily, soaking her coat as she stepped out. She didn't take an umbrella, didn't take anything except her phone and keys. Her steps were fast but careful. Her heart was beating so loudly that it drowned out the sound of the rain. The warehouse door, rickety and covered in rust, was ajar. She pushed it, and the metal creaked like a scream. It was dark inside, only the faint light from the street lamps filtering through the cracks in the roof, creating puddles on the concrete floor. The smell of dampness and mold hit my nose, mixed with something metallic. Sarah froze, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. "Alex," she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. "Where are you? Where's Emma?" Silence. Then footsteps, slow and steady, came from the depths. A figure appeared from the shadows. Alex, his dark hair stuck to his face from the rain, and his eyes burned with a feverish fire. In one hand he held a lantern, in the other a knife, its blade glinting dully. But worst of all was Emma. She stood there, her wrists bound with rope, her eyes wide and filled with fear. Her t-shirt was wet, her hair was sticking to her cheeks, but she didn't cry, she just looked at Sarah, her gaze a mixture of horror and accusation. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice shaking. "What's happening?" Sarah stepped forward, but Alex raised the knife. His movement was sharp. "No closer," he said, his voice low, but there was a trembling in it, as if he himself was teetering on the edge. "You did as I said. Fine. Now let's talk." "Let her go, Alex," Sarah said, her voice hoarse but firm. "She has nothing to do with it. This is between us." Alex laughed, but his laughter was empty, almost insane. "Between us? Oh, Sarah, you still don't understand. It's not just about us. It's about what you took from me. He stepped closer to Emma, his knife lightly touching her shoulder, and she flinched. You left me, choose your ideal life. But I haven't forgotten, and now you will pay. Sarah clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. What do you want? She asked, her voice icy, but inside she was falling apart. Name your price. Money? I'll give you everything we have. Just let Emma go. He shook his head, his eyes narrowing. Money? I don't need your money, Sarah. I need you. He paused, his gaze becoming heavy, almost obsessive. Come away with me. Leave your husband, your daughter, your life. Take all the money out of your accounts. I know you have savings. We'll leave and start again. You and me, as it should have been. Emma gasped, her eyes widening. Mom, what is he talking about? Her voice was full of panic, but there was also rage in it. What did you do? Sarah couldn't look at her daughter. Her gaze was focused on Alex, on his knife, on his face, which was once dear to her. Are you crazy? She said, her voice trembling. I won't leave my family. You can't force me. Alex smiled, but his smile was scary, like a grin. I can't. He pressed the knife to Emma's neck, not pressing, but close enough for Sarah to scream. If you don't do as I say, she will die. And then I'll kill myself. And you'll live with it, Sarah. You will know that you could have saved her, but you chose your lie. Emma began to tremble, her breathing becoming ragged. Mom, don't listen to him, she whispered, but her voice was weak. He's crazy. Don't do this. Sarah stepped forward, her hands raised as if she could stop him with a gesture. Alex, please, she said, her voice almost a plea. I gave you what you wanted. At the motel, I did it to keep you quiet. Let her go. You promised. He laughed. His laughter was bitter, like poison. Did you promise? Sarah, do you think I believe your tears? You gave me your body, but not yourself. You are still his, this mark, this life. He squeezed Emma tighter, and she screamed, her eyes filling with tears. But now you have no choice. Either you leave with me, or she pays for your sins. Sarah felt like the world was collapsing. Her eyes darted between Emma and Alex. Her mind searched for a way out, but there was none. She could agree, lie, buy time, but then what? He won't stop. She saw it in his eyes. He was beyond the bounds. His love turned into obsession, his pain into madness. Okay, she said finally, her voice quiet but clear. I'll leave with you. I'll withdraw the money, everything we have. But let Emma go, now. Alex looked at her, his eyes narrowed, as if he was looking for a catch. Are you serious? He asked, his voice filled with suspicion. No games, Sarah. If you try to deceive me, she will die. I won't deceive you, she said, her voice level even though she was screaming inside. Let her go, and I'll do what you want. Emma shook her head, her tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom, no, don't do this. He's lying. She tried to break free, but Alex pulled her back, his knife flashing. Shut up, he snapped, his voice breaking. He looked at Sarah, his breathing heavy. I'm giving you one chance. Convince me that you are mine. Kiss me, right here, in front of her. Show me that you chose me. Sarah froze, her throat tightening. She looked at Emma, at her face full of horror and disgust. But the knife was too close, and she knew Alex wasn't bluffing. She stepped forward, her legs feeling like lead. Her hand touched his cheek, her fingers trembling. She leaned down and kissed him, her lips cold and her heart breaking. Emma turned away, her sobs echoing in the empty warehouse. Alex pulled away, his eyes burning. Okay, he said, his voice hoarse. I believe you. But Emma will stay here until we leave. If you do as I say, I'll let her go. If not, he didn't finish, but his knife said it all for him. Sarah nodded, her eyes empty. I will, she whispered, but a plan was already brewing in her head not to submit, but to fight. She didn't know how, but she knew that she wouldn't give up Emma, wouldn't give up her life. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the howl of sirens, weak, but getting closer. Someone called the police. Time was running out, and Sarah knew this was her last chance. The rain became a solid wall, drowning out all sound except the wail of sirens as they approached the abandoned warehouse on River Road. Inside, in the twilight, smelling of dampness and rust, the air was heavy with tension. Sarah stood in front of Alex, her coat wet, her hair stuck to her face, and her eyes full of horror and determination, fixed on her daughter. Emma, her wrists bound with rough rope, was trembling, but her gaze was razor-sharp, darting between her mother and Alex. Alex held the knife to her neck, his hand tense, his face a mask of obsession, contorted with pain and anger. Outside the warehouse, police cars surrounded the warehouse, their red and blue lights shining through cracks in the walls, drawing ominous patterns on the concrete. Sarah felt like time was compressing. Every second was like a step towards the abyss. She had just kissed Alex, giving in to his insane demands to buy time, but her mind was frantically searching for a way out. Emma looked at her with disgust, and it was worse than any knife. But the sirens gave hope someone had called the police, perhaps a neighbor who had spotted her car or a passerby. And somewhere in this chaos was Mark. She didn't know how he knew, but she felt that he was close. Her phone, left in the car, could have given away her location, or maybe photos from the motel had reached him. The truth she was so afraid to reveal was now her only chance. "Alex," Sarah said, her voice even despite the shaking in her hands. "Can you hear the sirens? The police are here. Let Emma go, and we'll figure it out. You don't want this to end in blood." Alex laughed. His laugh was hoarse, almost insane. "Blood? Sarah, you brought us to this. You lied, you pretended, and now you want me to just leave?" He squeezed Emma tighter, and she screamed, her eyes filling with tears. "No. You will leave with me, or she will die. And I will die. You will live with this forever." Emma jerked, her voice weak, but furious. "You're crazy. Mom, don't listen to him. He's bluffing." "Shut up." Alex snapped, his knife moving a little closer to her neck, and Sarah stepped forward, her hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Please, Alex," she said, her voice soft, almost gentle, as if she could reach the person she once knew. "You're not like that. You won't hurt her. Let her go, and I will stay. I'll do what you want." He looked at her, his eyes narrowed, but there was a hint of doubt in them. "You're lying," he said, his voice quieter, but still dangerous. "You always lied. You were never mine, even then, 7 years ago." "I was," she lied, her voice shaking, but she held his gaze. "I made a mistake in choosing Mark. But now I'm here. Give me a chance to prove it." Every word was like poison, but she knew it was her only way to distract him. There was noise outside, squealing tires, slamming doors, muffled voices. The police were taking positions, and Sarah heard a megaphone. "Alexander Wayne, come out with your hands up. You are surrounded." Alex flinched, his hand trembled, and Emma took advantage of the moment, trying to break free, but he grabbed her by the hair, pulling her back. "They won't stop me," he hissed, his eyes darting around the warehouse like a hunted animal. "If I don't go out with you, Sarah, I'll take her with me. You understand? She will die." "No," Sarah shouted, her voice breaking. She stepped closer, ignoring the knife, ignoring everyone but Emma. "I won't let you take her. Do you want me? I'm yours. But let my daughter go." The warehouse door burst open with a bang, and the light from the lanterns blinded them. The figure rushed inside, its steps heavy, determined. Mark. His face was contorted with rage, his eyes were burning, and in his hands he was clutching a pistol, an old revolver that he kept in a safe for emergencies. The police were moving behind him, their weapons at the ready, but Mark was in front, his gaze fixed on Alex. "Let go of my daughter, you bastard." Mark barked, his voice was like thunder above the sound of the rain. The gun shook in his hands, but his finger was on the trigger. Now, Alex turned, his knife still at Emma's neck, but now he was looking at Mark, his lips curled into a bitter smile. "Oh, a hero has come," he said, his tone venomous. "Do you know, Mark? Your wife was mine. 7 years ago and yesterday at the motel. She's been lying to you your whole life." Sarah gasped, her legs giving way. "Mark, don't listen to him," she shouted, her voice filled with despair. "He's lying. I did it to protect Emma. Mark didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Alex, but his face turned white, his jaw clenched. Shut up, he growled, but it was unclear whether he was saying this to Alex or Sarah. Let Emma go, or I'll blow your brains out. Emma sobbed, her voice weak. Dad, don't shoot. He's not himself. But her eyes were full of fear, and she was trembling, her body tense under Alex's grip. The policeman standing behind Mark raised his megaphone. Alexander, lower your weapon. We don't want victims. Let the girl go, and we'll talk. Alex laughed. His laugh was harsh, almost hysterical. Shall we talk? There is no conversation. He looked at Sarah, his eyes empty, as if he had already crossed the line. You made your choice, Sarah. You chose them. Now watch what happens. He raised the knife. His movement was quick, but not to strike. He pressed the blade to his own throat, his hand trembling. If I can't have you, no one will, he said, his voice hoarse. Goodbye. No, Sarah shouted, rushing forward, but it was too late. The shot rang out, deafening like thunder. Mark pulled the trigger, his face a mask of rage and pain. The bullet hit Alex in the chest, and he staggered, his knife falling to the floor with a dull clang. Emma broke free, her ropes loosened, and she rushed towards Sarah, her sobs tearing the air. Alex collapsed to his knees, his hands clutched to his chest, blood flowing between his fingers, staining the concrete. His eyes, still open, found Sarah, and there was not hatred in them, but something else, regret, maybe, or relief. You were mine, he whispered, and his body went limp, his head falling onto his chest. Sarah hugged Emma, holding her so tightly that she was choking. Are you okay, baby? She whispered, her voice broken by tears. You're okay. The police rushed in, their voices shouting over each other, but Sarah didn't listen. She held Emma, her hands stroking her hair, her face, as if she was afraid that her daughter would disappear. Mark stood motionless, his gun still pointed at Alex's body, his breathing heavy as if he had just run a marathon. The policeman gently took the weapon from his hands, but Mark did not resist. His eyes finally found Sarah, and there was a storm in them, pain, betrayal, love, everything mixed into one look. You, he began, his voice hoarse, but he fell silent, his jaw clenching. How could you? Sarah shook her head, her tears streaming down her cheeks. I wanted to protect us, she whispered. I was wrong, Mark. Sorry. Emma pulled away, her face wet with tears, but her gaze sharp. You knew him, she said, her voice quiet but full of accusation. You lied to us. All this time. Sarah wanted to answer, but the words stuck. The police surrounded them. One of them threw a blanket over Emma's shoulders. The other began asking questions, but Sarah did not hear. She looked at Alex's body, at the blood spreading across the floor, and felt like her life was falling apart. The truth had come out, and now she had to face the consequences with Mark, with Emma, with herself. The rain kept pouring down, washing away the blood from the concrete, but not washing away the sins. The warehouse was Alex's grave, but for the Whitakers it was only the beginning of a long road to forgiveness, if that was even possible. The rain that drenched the city that fateful night in the warehouse had long since subsided, but its echoes seemed to have settled forever in the life of Sarah Whitaker. 6 months had passed since Mark's bullet ended Alex's life, but the silence that followed was heavier than any noise. The Whitaker house, once full of warmth and laughter, was now just a shell, empty, cold, with the echo of footsteps and closing doors. The truth that came out that night did not free Sarah as she had hoped, but destroyed everything she had tried to protect. Her family, her life, her own self, everything crumbled like sand slipping through her fingers. Mark filed for divorce 2 weeks after the events in the warehouse. He returned from New York full of ambition and plans, but instead found a betrayal that he could neither understand nor forgive. Sarah tried to talk to him while sitting at the kitchen table that had once been their shared sanctuary. Her voice trembled, her words slurred. She begged him to understand that she acted for Emma, for their family. I didn't mean to, Mark, she whispered, her eyes red from crying. I thought I was protecting us. I was wrong, but I never wanted to lose you." Mark looked at her, his face as still as stone, but there was a storm in his eyes. "You lied to me, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but full of pain. "7 years ago, yesterday, every day. You chose him, not me. And because of you, our daughter almost died." He stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "I can't look at you without seeing him. I can't live with this." She wanted to object, to grab his hand, but he had already turned, his steps echoing loudly in the empty house. The next day, the lawyer brought the documents. Divorce was inevitable, and Mark did not back down. He demanded full custody of Emma, arguing that Sarah was unfit to be a mother after what had happened. The court hearings lasted for months. Each of them was like a knife piercing her heart. Emma, who had just turned 15, became a stranger. The girl who had once climbed into Sarah's lap and shared her drawings now looked at her mother with cold hatred. At the first custody hearing, she refused to speak to Sarah, her eyes blank and her lips pursed. When the judge asked where she wanted to live, Emma answered without looking at her mother. "With Dad. She lied to us her whole life. She almost got me killed. I don't want to see her." These words echoed in Sarah's head every night as she lay in her new apartment small, with bare walls and a creaky bed. She moved out a month after Mark filed for divorce, leaving the house they had built together. Emma didn't answer her calls, didn't open her messages, and when Sarah tried to meet her at school, the girl simply walked away, her braids swinging as a sign of the final breakup. The trial was grueling. Mark's lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman with cold eyes, dug up all the details of Sarah's past. The video, which Alex never managed to send, was found by police on his laptop and became evidence in the case. Although it was not publicly displayed, its existence leaked into the courtroom, and every glance of the judge, jury, even the stenographer was full of condemnation. Sarah sat on the bench, her hands folded in her lap and her face flushed with shame. She didn't deny her guilt, but every word from Mark's lawyer, treason, irresponsibility, child endangerment, was like a blow from a whip. Her own lawyer, an elderly man with a tired voice, tried to reduce the sentence. He talked about blackmail, about how Sarah acted under pressure to save her daughter, but his arguments were drowned in a sea of evidence. The judge, a stern-faced woman with gray hair, made her decision 3 months later. Mark received full custody of Emma, and Sarah was allowed limited visits 1 hour a month under the supervision of a social worker. Hearing this, Sarah closed her eyes. Her fingers squeezed the edge of the table, but she did not cry. The tears stopped on the first night after the warehouse. The divorce was also painful. Mark took the house, the car, most of the savings, leaving Sarah enough to start over, but not much more. He was not cruel, but his pain made him uncompromising. As they signed the final papers, he looked at her across the table in the lawyer's office, his eyes empty. "I loved you, Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse. "But you broke everything. I can't trust you. Never." She nodded, her throat tightening. "I know," she whispered. "Sorry." He left without answering, and that was the last she heard from him. Emma, who was present at the signing, didn't even look in her direction. Her backpack was slung over her shoulder, and her headphones were drowning out the world, including her mother. Sarah tried to move on with her life, but every day was like walking on broken glass. She found a job as an interior designer in a small company where no one knew her background. Her colleagues were polite, but kept their distance, and she didn't blame them. She felt like a ghost existing on the periphery of her own life. Her apartment was almost empty, a bed, a table, several books that she did not open. There was one watercolor hanging on the wall, the same one from the guest house that she took when she left. She looked at it sometimes, but did not draw. Brushes and paints are a thing of the past, just like Sarah, who believed in art. Visits with Emma were excruciating. They passed in a dull office of the guardianship service, where there was a smell of coffee and paper. Emma sat across from him, her arms crossed and her gaze fixed on the floor. The social worker, a good-natured middle-aged woman, tried to diffuse the situation, but Emma answered in monosyllables and sometimes simply remained silent. Sarah talked about the weather, about work, about how bored she was, but every word was like a stone thrown into the abyss. Emma didn't forgive. She blamed Sarah for everything, for Alex, for the knife at her throat, for the fact that her world, so safe and familiar, had collapsed. "You could have told Dad," Emma said one day, her voice as cold as ice. "But you chose to lie. And because of you, I almost died." Sarah tried to explain, but the words stuck. "I wanted to protect you," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought I could stop him." Emma shook her head, her lips pursing. "You were thinking about yourself, not about me." She got up, her hour was up, and left without saying goodbye. The social worker looked at Sarah with sympathy, but Sarah could not accept it. She deserved this pain. The city moved on, but for Sarah time stood still. She learned from the newspapers that Alex's case was closed. His death was ruled self-defense, and Mark was not punished. The photos from the motel, taken by an unknown person, never surfaced, but their shadow haunted Sarah. She knew that someone saw, someone knew, and this knowledge was like a burden that she carried every day. Sometimes she walked to the Whitakers' house, stopping across the street. The windows were bright, laughter could be heard from the kitchen. Mark and Emma were learning to live without her. She saw Emma walk out of the house, her backpack swinging and a faint smile on her face. Mark sometimes appeared on the porch, his hair grayer, but he looked calmer than in court. Sarah didn't come any closer. She knew she had no right. Her life became a series of gray days, where the only light was memories not of the past with Alex, but of those years when Emma was little, when Mark kissed her temple, when their house was home. She didn't blame them for their hatred. She blamed herself. And every night, falling asleep in her empty apartment, she whispered the same thing: "I'm sorry." But no one heard. The city lived, the sun rose, the rains came and went. And Sarah Whitaker, a woman who once loved too much and lied too many, is left alone, surrounded by the ashes of her life, trying to find a way to start again. But ashes do not forgive, and she knew that some wounds never heal. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.